Good morning. If you have a hard time hearing me in the back because I get to be soft-spoken, please let me know if you can't hear me. I would appreciate it, and we can signal to George up here who's running sound. And he has been awesome. He's been coming every week. We've been doing outdoor services. He's been here early to set up, and we are looking at expanding our sound team. So we're doing that, but for right now, George has been willing to just come every week, and I'm just grateful for his help. It is really, yeah, you can applaud if you want to. He's great. I'm also really glad you guys are here, and I'm looking forward to the children's song next week, and trying to find new ways to engage everybody all at the same time. That means, as parents, the children's song is not just for the children to sing. If you have children, you have to learn the song too. They're just going to look at you and say, yeah, I'm out too. So you have to sing the song. So, and it's really easy. The one we got is like, the recording is going to say the words and you repeat it. It's that simple, right? So it wouldn't be hard. You don't have to memorize anything. But when that email comes with that song, just check it out. It's a good song. We did it in Cuba, the kids and the adults. Everybody loved it. So anyway, I'm looking forward to that. This week we are starting a new book, the Book of Ruth. In truth, the Book of Ruth isn't really supposed to be a book. It's actually part of Judges. Judges was supposed to continue, and they separated it off sometime in the past and made it a separate book called Ruth. And the reason it's named Ruth is because she's one of the main characters, but I don't really see her as the main character as we kind of go through the story. So I'm just going to kind of tell the story. So once upon a time, right? Once upon a time, there was a guy named Elimelech, and he had a wife named Naomi, and they had two sons named Mahlon and Chilion. And the four of them lived in Bethlehem, right? That's where Jesus was born. And so they lived in the area of Bethlehem, and the weather was bad. They didn't have any rain, and so they couldn't grow any crops, and their sheep were going to starve because there was nothing for the sheep to eat, nothing for them to eat. And so they they went east across the Jordan, and they settled in the land of Moab. And in the land of Moab, the boys grew up, and they fell in love, and they got married. And so Naomi has a family now of a husband, two sons, and two daughters-in-law. And if you're like most of us, we find when our kids get married, getting used to your in-laws is not that easy, right? But for them, they got along really, really well. And all of a sudden, Elimelech's husband dies. Elimelech dies, and Naomi's husbandless. She's a widow. And so she's living with her two sons and her two daughters-in-law. And I'm certain with everyone who loses their husband, it's hard. But she still has two sons. But her sons die as well. Now, the reality of living in a world where it's a men's world in many ways, it's much more difficult to live as a woman without being married. And that's just the reality of living in this world, as unfair as it is. And it's much easier now than it used to be. But back then, if you were a widow, you were destitute. There was no places that hired women. They were destitute. There were three women, all widows, figuring out how they're going to make life work. And so she decides she's going to go back to Bethlehem. And so she's going to go back to Bethlehem, and her daughters-in-law start going with her. And in that culture, you actually, if you were a widow, you've got your husband's brother as a husband to take care of you, and you would have children that would inherit your property, and all the property of Israel would remain in that family line. Now, they're not in Israel for that to happen, but there are no husbands. And Naomi's just saying, I can't provide any more sons. I'm a widow, and I'm too old. Go home, and in your own homeland, in your own culture, find another husband and a new life. And she released them, and they both did not want to go. They both wept, and they both said, no, take us with you, right? And you see this lady with two women dragging her on each leg. She's just picture, they do not want to leave her. That's their mother-in-law. Think about that for a minute. I don't know many people who are in love with their mother-in-laws. And there's nothing really wrong with mother-in-laws. They're just people. And you weren't raised with that mother, but we have a hard time with our mother-in-laws, right? I mean, if I ask for a call of hands, how many guys have trouble? You're not going to do that because just in case it's caught on Facebook Live, right? So you don't want to do that. But the truth is, most of us struggle with our in-laws, both our mother-in-laws and father-in-laws, not just mother-in-laws, right? But this is father-in-law's gone, and they love their mother-in-law. And so Naomi convinces Orpah to go back home. And she does. She goes back home. But she can't convince Ruth. And so if you have your Bible here, and if the kids has their Bible, they can open it up to the book of Ruth, chapter 1, drop down to verse 16. This is Ruth's commitment to her mother-in-law. This is above and beyond her own family. When she left her family to get married to Naomi's sons, she made a commitment to this family that went beyond her husband relationship, right? And so in verse 16, Ruth convinces Naomi to take her with her with these words. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." So her commitment, almost like a marriage vow to her mother-in-law. All right, and so Naomi concedes and takes Ruth with her, which works out pretty well, because Ruth is able then, when they get to the area of Bethlehem, she's able to go into the fields and find some food. Now, think about this for a second. They don't go to grocery stores. If you want food, you have to grow your own food or you have to buy it, and they have nothing. So she's going out in the fields. In Israel at that time, they were not allowed to pick up every grain off the ground, because for the poor and for the foreigner, they were supposed to welcome foreigners. And the foreigners were supposed to be able to glean, which means take the grains off the ground that the harvesters missed. And so she finds a field to pick up grain, one piece at a time, out of the dirt. Now, I actually worked a harvest in Kansas once, worked in a wheat field, and I remember it was a rough harvest because it rained a little bit every day, and it has to be dry, otherwise it's combustible when you get it into the co-op, into the elevators. So it has to be a certain percentage dry, otherwise it's too dangerous to store. And so every time it rained, we had to stop what we were doing and wait till the next day and then start harvesting again. Then it would rain like 10 minutes in Kansas for a whole month. Never happened, but the year I did a harvest. But I remember one day we went out into the field and we looked down on the ground. He said, "I'm going to show you something." He goes, "Every day it rains, I lose a certain amount of money because the grain falls out of the head and onto the ground." And he draws out basically a square foot, and he counts the number of grain, and he had a calculation to know how many bushels of wheat he lost per acre based about how many were on the ground. But what it did, it looked and saw what was really on the ground. And there was probably about 4 or 5 pieces of wheat on the ground per rainstorm. All right, but so this time it was only a few pieces. So you're picking grain up off the ground. And the guy who owns these fields finds out who she is and sees this woman, Ruth, who is a woman of good reputation, a woman like Psalm 31, actually uses the same description. What is the, Mindy knows this, what's it called? What kind of woman? Yeah, what kind of woman is a good woman is hard to find, or something, something, a what? Virtuous might be that word, but it is the same Hebrew word described of Ruth here as in Proverbs 31. And so he respects her, and he tells the guys that are harvesting, leave some grain on the ground. Matter of fact, pull out extra for her, because she is taking care of my family member, Naomi. Now, Naomi, before she gets here, she actually, everybody, when she first gets to town, everybody says, "Naomi's back." And she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Lord has made my life bitter. She's taken my husband and my 2 sons, and I have nothing left." And so she sees bitterness as her lot in life. Now, the thing is that eventually what happens is Ruth marries Boaz and has a child who becomes the great-grandfather of King David, the greatest king in Israel's history. And she becomes, I don't know how many greats, but a grandmother to Jesus, because it goes through her line that she becomes in the lineage described of the birth of Christ. Now, we go all the way through that God has his own purposes, and his purpose isn't to make life really good for any individual. It isn't supposed to make life great for Naomi or for Ruth. life happens, and God's major plan isn't about trying to make sure that they have a great life. And what happens a lot of times when life is taken away from you, when you go through a loss like death or poverty or something that you counted on, or your dreams, or whatever it is that you think life should be, when it's taken from you, you can go one of two directions. You can get angry at God, or you can depend on God. That's really your only two choices. You can be angry at God, punish him by choosing not to believe in him. A lot of people become atheists because they're mad at God. It's not like they really believe God doesn't exist. They're mad at him. And so you can choose to just say, I don't want anything to do with God anymore. But this is what she did, is she actually remained faithful. And I'll tell you how she knows that in a minute. But I want to read another verse here. If you open up your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 30. This is right before the one with the virtuous woman who can find, in Proverbs 31. But Proverbs 30, drop all the way down to verse 7. And in here, in verse 7, it actually says, 2 things I ask of you, Lord, and do not refuse me before I die. These are the 2 things he wants. And the first one is in verse 8. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. That's the first one. Move that one aside. We don't really want to be lied to, and we don't want to be liars. But the second one is what I want you to pay attention to. Give me neither poverty or riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who needs the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and dishonor the name of my God. Those 2 directions. You can have plenty and you don't need God, which is what we're going to struggle with most in our culture. Or you can get mad at God and you may not steal, but you dishonor the name of God because you're not going to follow him because you're bitter. Now, granted, Naomi takes on the name bitter. Call me bitter. Mara, call me bitter. And maybe she was really bitter at God at the time. But here's the thing that gets me. And this is why I think the story is really about Naomi. It's really about Ruth and Boaz and having a child that continues the line of the king and eventually the line of Christ. But if you look at the book, the most amazing person is Naomi. She is able to do a few things. First of all, she's got 2 daughters-in-law that love her enough to make sure they don't want to leave her. And one of them forfeits everything about her life. And what Ruth says is, your people are my people, your God, my God. So in order for her to give up her gods, she has to believe in the God of Israel that she sees through the person of Naomi. Naomi has lived some sort of life that's so convincing and so loving and so wonderful that Ruth wants to spend the rest of her life with Naomi, whether she gets married or not. I think it's astounding that a woman can have that much influence over another or any person, and certainly your daughter-in-law. That you could have that kind of influence over another person. And I don't think it's forced. I think they lived together. It is her existence to have a faith in God that that Ruth says, I'll buy into that. I'll be with you and your God becomes my God, because there's a reality to it that says that's what I want. Now, as you go through life, it's okay to sit here and have careers and plan what you want, what kind of house you want to live, and what kind of life you want to give your kids. It's okay to a point, but that isn't your point. That isn't the reason you're supposed to live. You're supposed to live for Jesus Christ. You're supposed to love him and enjoy him forever. That's what we're supposed to do. So those other things are just byproducts or things that can come or go. But your life is supposed to be so devoted that becomes your purpose. And then whether it goes good or whether it goes bad, it is just, I exist for him, whether it's in the good or the bad. It's just when it's bad or when it's good. Because it was decent when they were in Moab, and she was influencing her daughters-in-law then, but she continued to even when things went badly. So it didn't matter whether things were great or whether things were horrible. She still has an impact on Ruth that says, I'm giving up my gods, my family, everything to follow you and the God that you follow. How many of you can say that about your life? That you have such a profound impact. The way you live out your faith impacts somebody else so deeply. Because it should. We should be screaming, say, God, make my life like Naomi's. I don't want my life to just look. Most of us can go through life and figure out our goal is retirement and a comfortable retirement. That is not what a Christian life is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a life of devotion. And your goal should be How many people, God, do you want me to influence while I breathe? And then how do you live normally? It's not forced. Do you live normally enough to where that would happen just because you love God enough that becomes a part of your conversation? It becomes a part of the way you manage your time and your money and your talents. Everything else should match up with what your real desires are. And so commitment to Jesus Christ is everything. It's everything. And unfortunately, we don't find this until things come crashing down. When your marriage falls apart, when one of your children get a disease, or when they can, I've buried children. Those are some of the most horrible times in the ministry. Matter of fact, when I got in the ministry, I said I would love to do everything in the ministry except funerals. But funerals are the reality, the place where reality meets life, is that the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, as Job said. It is at that place you find out whether your faith is real or not. And so know those things are coming. What are you doing to prepare for that now? You spending time with God? You spending time in the Bible? Do you love him enough to, or can you just admit, God, I don't really love you enough. I need help. Help me to fall in love with you more. Help me to get closer to you, because that is the key to life. And then everything else evens itself out. When you are in love with God and you know he's in love with you, everything else is like, it'll be okay. If you don't develop that, then when things come crashing down, you might disown God. You might just say, forget it, this isn't worth it. Because God was supposed to deliver a good life, or this supposed to protect this person, or answer all your prayers, or give you everything you want. Separate that out. Your life belongs to him, not the other way around. He doesn't live to serve you. You live to serve him. And it will change everything. But you have to be honest with yourself where you're at. I don't think very many people are. I don't think that we stop to say, you know what? Everything else I really put in a higher priority in God. The quality of my car, the life I lead, what's in my bank account, what I'm doing with my time, my plans, my vacation, my vacation home, my job, my career, my family, my kids, college. All our dreams are wrapped up in this. And they take these high priorities, and then God gets whatever's left over. And it should be the other way around. Even our children should get what's left over. It's the way it's supposed to be. And so take an honest analysis of how much you're in love with God, and then be honest with him about it. Why don't you bow your heads for me, please? And in your own words, just take the time to say, God, I want to be honest right now. Are you a hobby, or do you mean the world to me? And God, right now, is revealing that answer to you in all honesty. And if God is really the center of your life, you can say, God, thank you for keeping my heart protected and in the right place. But if God isn't the priority, you can say, God, I'm sorry. Take my heart and make it yours. And help me to follow you every day that I live. Strengthen my faith from this day on forever and ever and ever. I want to be yours always. In Jesus' name, amen. It's really important that you make those type of commitments, those vows to God, and you keep it in front of you all the time, or you'll forget. Life in the world will just take over. At this time, what we're going to do is we're going to share communion. So if you don't have a communion packet, you want one, would you raise your hand so we can have an elder come and take? Raise your hand up high, please, so we can see. There's a couple in the back. Just a couple back there. If you can take, Greg's going to take those back for you. If you haven't met Greg, he's one of our elders. So he'll take communion back. And so during this song, you can take communion whenever you're in the right place. But what I'd like to do is just take a moment of silence as we examine our hearts where God is in your life. And if you can we want to be right with him. And maybe you just made yourself right with him, and that's great. Then you can take communion at any time during the song. But Jesus asked us to do this out of a level of gratitude, to remember what he did for us. Even though the disciples didn't know what was going on, he said, he took the bread and broke it and said, this is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat and do this in remembrance of me. And then he said, take the cup. And he said, this is the cup of the everlasting covenant, the cup of my blood, which has been shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And so during this last song, we'll stand, everybody will just stand up. Can we all stand up? There we go. And at some point in the song, just, take those elements of the communion when you're ready. And then sing to Christ as if you really mean it, not as if you're just going through the motions. All right? Enjoy.
This is a song